Okay. Okay, fine. Let's share. Let us share this thing. I am streaming. Okay. Yes. Yeah, I think YouTube has way better share. A share button. It's just way better. Anyway. So. Today. Oh, wait. Before moving on. I always forget to set up everything. So what we are going to be watching today is the last section of the course for mastering Informatica Power Center. I've been, this is my second week learning Informatica. No, I think this is my third week already. Yeah, my third week. It's already my third week, and I've been missing a lot of time, I guess, just configuring Informatica and trying to make it work.
Hey everyone, welcome to this course on Mastering Informatica Power Center 9 by Pact Publishing. This course has been authored by Raoul Malware. I'm Greg Arnold, the voiceover artist for this course. In this course, we'll take a look at the advanced aspects of the designer and workflow manager screens. Raoul has more than 10 years of experience working with Informatica Power Center. He also has around 6 years of teaching experience in IPC, Informatica Cloud, and other databases. He's also the author of the book Learning Informatica Power Center 9.x, the video course Getting Started with Informatica, and Implementing Informatica Power Center 9 for Pact Publishing. This course will introduce the advanced topics in Informatica. This course comprises of 6 sections and covers one of the most important aspects in Informatica. In the first section, you'll start by learning to debug a mapping. This will help you identify any issues in mappings and creating reusable information, which allows you to reuse the transformation across mappings. Section 2, you'll be introduced to manage different constraints using target load plan. You'll also compare different objects in a mapping. Also, identify dependencies within a repository. Section 3, we'll discuss about the different types of tasks. They include command task, email task, event task, and timer task. We'll learn how to create these tasks in Workflow Manager screen. In Section 4, we'll talk about more different types of tasks, such as the link task, decision task, assignment task, and control task. We'll also understand the various properties of the session task. Section 5 is centered on the advanced features of Workflow Manager. They include schedulers, reusable tasks, worklets, and parameter files. You'll learn about the importance and operation of incremental aggregation. We'll also learn how to define variables at session level, mapping level, and workflow level. Finally, in the sixth section, we'll discuss about the various techniques to enhance the performance in Informatica. To enhance the performance, we'll learn about source, target, and transformation bottlenecks. We're going to see the various ways of optimizing the components of Power Center tool. In order to work through this course, it's recommended that you have Informatica up and running, along with the knowledge of the various services available in Informatica. You should also be familiar familiar with the Power Center Designer, as well as the creation of users and assigning those privileges, also running workflows. Okay, now that we know what lies ahead, let's get started with this course.
Okay. Creating and reusable transformations.
Reusable transformations. This video, we'll talk about what reusable transformations are, the use of reusable transformations in the same mapping, use of reusable transformations in multiple mapping. Apart from the basic functionalities of creating mappings, Designer Screen offers multiple utilities to assist you in smoother execution of the ETL processing. Some of these functionalities will be regularly used, and some will be rare to you. It's always good to have an understanding of these functionalities to have the upper hand on the tool. Now let's talk about reusable transformation. As you are aware, source and targets are reusable components, i.e., you work on sources in Source Analyzer and Target in Target Designer, respectively. You must also be aware that you cannot edit sources and targets in Mapping Designer, but they can be edited in Source Analyzer and Target Designer, respectively only. Sources and targets are called reusable components because you can use the same source and target in multiple mappings. We can reuse the source or target across multiple mappings only if the metadata requirement of both the mappings are exactly the same. Metadata in this case means the number of columns, their data type, data size, indexes, constraints, etc. Even if small changes are there, you cannot reuse the components. On the same lines, if we have the same logic to implement across multiple mappings, we can use the reusable transformations. That allows us to reuse the same transformation across the mappings. You can also reuse the transformation if the metadata requirements in the mapping are exactly the same. Even if there's a small difference, the reusable transformations will not work as there can be a mismatch in the processing. There are two ways in which you could create reusable transformations. One, using Transformation Developer. Two, make existing transformation reusable. We'll learn to create reusable transformation in Transformation Developer. In Designer, click Transformation and click Create. Select the type of transformation you wish to create from the list. We're creating an expression transformation, for example. Click Create and click on Done. The transformation will appear on the screen. Also, you will see the transformation added in your navigator under Transformations. Now you can drag and drop the transformation a multiple number of times in the Mapping Designer to use it as a reusable component. You'll notice that you cannot edit the reusable transformation in Mapping Designer. To edit the reusable transformation, you need to use Transformation Developer. Now let's learn to create existing transformation as reusable transformation. Let's consider that you already have a transformation which you wish to use in another mapping, but since it's not reusable, you're not able to do that. To solve this issue, we have an option which you can make an existing non-reusable transformation as reusable. Double-click the transformation to view the properties of the transformation. You'll see an option to make reusable. Click on the box so you can see which option as reusable. A warning message will pop up mentioning the process is irreversible, which means once this transformation has been reusable, it cannot be reverted back. Click on Yes. Now you can see the transformation added to the transformation in Navigator. This indicates the transformation can be reused, which you could drag in other mappings as well. In this video, we saw how to make a transformation reusable. Going further, you may also like to reuse a logic implemented using multiple transformations. For example, you may wish to reuse a group of transformations. In the next video, we'll talk about creating maplets.
Okay, stop. That's interesting. It was around a 2-minute video. So let's see. I do have a router here. I have several. This router transformation, I guess if I double click, I can click here to make it reusable. Okay, converting the current transformation into reusable transformation is not reversible. Continue, yes. Okay, now it's reusable. So what does that imply? Is it still there? It now appears here. And I guess, there we go. I guess now it's a reusable transformation. I can add it any number of times I want. Okay. And I guess the only way to actually modify, I cannot modify them here, I guess. Yeah, no. Is this? No, it's red only. So I guess I need to go to the transformation developer, add it here, and here I can modify it. There we go. I can modify it here. And the groups. Okay, so here is where I can modify them. So far so good, I guess. I guess we can move to the next video. Let's go.
Designer in Informatica Power Center Designer. In the case of reusable transformations, to use the maplets, the metadata requirements of the mappings should be exactly the same. To create a new maplet in Designer, click on Tools and select Maplet Design. Hey guys, in this video, we'll talk about maplets. We'll talk about what maplets are and how to create maplets in Maplet Designer screen. The group of transformations which can be reused is called maplets. You can create maplets in Maplet Designer in Informatica Power Center Designer. In the case of reusable transformations, to use the maplets, the metadata requirements of the mappings should be exactly the same. To create a new maplet in Designer, click on Tools and select Maplet Designer and click Create. Specify the name of the new maplet. We'll use NPLT_reusable. Add the transformations in the maplet as per your logic. We're using filter and expression transformations to create a sample logic. As you know, maplets require sources and targets for execution. Just as similar, maplets also require sources and targets, which will be created as transformations. Click transformations and create maplet input as NPLT_input and maplet output as NPLT_output. mplt_output. Place maplet input before the filter and maplet output after expression. Drag columns from expression transformation to mplt_output and drag columns from filter transformation.
Okay, get it.
Input. Press Ctrl S to save the maplet. Then you'll be able to see the maplet is added under the maplets in Navigator. You can now drag the maplet in the mapping designer to use it as a reusable component. Drag the maplet in the mapping designer. Source qualifier to the input ports to the maplet. From source qualifier to the input ports to the maplet.
Okay.
Output ports of maplet to the target. Filter and expression transformations are not required.
Not required anymore.
Use multiple transformations in an existing mapping. You can simply copy the existing transformations from mapping designer and paste it in maplet designer. It's the easiest way to use the existing groups of transformations. As you may have noticed, simply copy the existing transformations from mapping designer and paste it in maplet designer. It's the easiest way to use the existing groups of transformations. As you may have noticed, maplet serves your two purposes. First, it allows you to reuse your existing transformation. It also makes your mapping look simpler by replacing multiple components with a single component. That wraps it up here. In the next video, we'll learn about debugger.
Okay, stop. Oh, that is a really good video actually. So let's try the mapping thing. So here, oh well, this is a transformation thing, but I may like to choose another one. A router, sorter. Can I open this one? It doesn't have too many things. Can I open this? Sorter. I think router is the most it's the quote unquote most complicated one to do. So okay, look, I already make it a maplet. Or here, a transformation developer. It's a reusable transformation. But now I need to go to Maplet Designer, click on Maplets, click Create, and let's say MPLT for Maplet, and let's say router. So this is a maplet. So I guess it's here. There we go. There it is. So now I can pick my router transformation, insert it here. Okay. And now I just need to replicate what I'm seeing here in the maplet designer. So okay. So I am here. What's this? Maplet input. So these are the maplet input and the maplet output. Okay, so the input, let's select all of these fields, and these are the inputs, okay, for this router. And I'm going to have an exit for every single group. So let's create this. Well, output is okay, I guess. I wonder if I can, in this case, can I do this? I guess I can. Oh, it deleted the entire thing. Never mind. So you are going to, I wonder if I can do several outputs. Different outputs, I mean. Okay, so you are going to be output USA. You are going to be output USA. I guess I can. There we go. This is the Mexico output. I'm guessing I didn't see this on the video, so but I guess that I can have several outputs for the same maplet. And there we go. And this is going to be the default output. Okay, looks like the maplet is valid. And now let's move back to the mapping designer. And I guess I can just delete this thing. It's no longer required. And I can just pick up this maplet here. And there we go. And it even has the same outputs. And here are the outputs I created, so it's fine. There we go. So this is the default. This is for Mexico. And this is for USA. Okay, so the last one is USA. I'm going to move this down here. The default is the first one, and Mexico is in the middle. And there we go. I wonder if I can validate this thing. Looks like the router is valid. And I want to actually run this. I wonder if it's going to work. Let's open Workflow Manager. And I need to validate this thing, I guess. It needs to be valid. Save it. And now I shall... Well, the mapping didn't change since I only modified the mapping. In the mapping designer, I just replaces this thing for a maplet. And I guess that maplets are going to be my library of transformations, really. For complex transformations. I may have in my transformations folder, I'm going to be storing a lot of transformations for things that happen all day, you know. So I guess I should be able to run this thing. So let's see. Okay, it's hanging there. Sometimes it hangs, but I'm not sure. Yeah, the computer is hanging. Okay, it's running. It's taking a long time to run. And it says it succeeded. So maybe I should try to query the data. Okay. What about USA? Why is taking so long? And just querying a table, it should not take that much time. It took a long ass time just to print out 2 rows. Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that. And that's what I don't really like to run database engines in Windows. Because I get to see this kind of things happening. On Linux it's even worse if something happens, obviously. But it's very rare. As long as you follow the instructions, the database just doesn't hang. And I believe that I am already using this computer for a lot of stuff. So maybe that's the issue. And the defaults. Okay, so let's check out the source database for the employees. And I may like to... Can I modify this thing? I don't think so. Not from here, obviously. Let's look for the source database. Let's look for the employees table. Let's check out the data. Maybe I may like to add a couple new ones. Maybe, oh, I don't know. Hmm. Let's add a new one. Maybe H23. And let's commit those changes. I added a new row for every single country on the table, for every single location. So now, okay, the changes was committed. I'm going to run this thing again. And before that, I may like to check out to verify that I only get in two rows for every single table. And the idea is that when I run the workflow manager again, this workflow, I should get 3 new rows on those tables basically. Well, just one new row for every single table. Looks like it ran successfully already. And there we go. Here we have it. There we go. And those are my new, so the router transformation works. So this works. Let's move to the next thing.
Welcome back. In
Wait, I don't know why it's doing that.
this video, we'll talk about what debugger is and how to set up and execute debugger. Let's now talk about debugger. Informatica Power Center provides a utility called debugger to debug mapping. So that way,
Okay.
you can find the issue in the mapping you created. Using debugger, you can see the flow of every record across the transformations. As you are aware, Informatica Power Center is not a data storage tool. It's a data manipulation tool, which helps you in manipulating the data. This point is important in aspect of the debugger because once you finish the process, to verify the data, you only have either the source or the target to check the result and compare. Debugger jumps in with a functionality which provides you with the option to actually see the data flow from each and every transformation in your mapping. When you execute the mapping through session task, the data automatically starts flowing from the source to target through transformations.
Okay.
The same process you're doing manually using the debugger. Here's an example. To understand the debugger functionality, you created a mapping with 100 transformations, 1,000 records present in your source. You executed the mapping and got the results. When you started analyzing the output in your target table, you found the data in a few columns incorrect. And now the problem is you are not sure that out of the 3 transformations where actually the issue started, your solution is debugger. Debugger will allow you to see the movement of each record from every transformation. That way, you can identify the origin of the error and accordingly rectify. Let's set up and execute debugger. In Designer, click Tools, Mapping Designer, Mapping, Debugger, Start Debugger. A new window will pop up mentioning pre-checks for the debugger. Please read the points clearly before you proceed. Click Next. Next screen will ask you to select the session task for the mapping you wish to debug. Select the session task you created
Okay.
and execute the mapping. Even though running a debugger is a manual process, you still need a session task because integration service needs to get the path for extracting and loading the data, which is provided in session task. Note that you can use an existing session or create a new debug session for running the debugger. If you use an existing session, the debugger will use the properties mentioned in the session. You need to mention all details if you create a new debug session. After
Okay.
selecting the session, click Next. Select the appropriate session in the next window. Click Next. In the next screen, you'll see the option to discard the target data. This option indicates what you wish to do with the data you loaded in the target using debugger. Since you run the debugger for testing purposes, you basically wish to discard the target data. Check
Okay,
the
discard the target data.
Click Finish. The output panel
I don't need it anyway.
3 sections as seen in the video. Notification. This section will show general information about the debugger execution. Target instance. This will show the data as it reaches the target of your mapping. If your mapping contains multiple targets, all the targets will be displayed in the section in the dropdown. You can select the target for which you wish to see the data from the dropdown. Instance. This will show the data when it reaches different transformations of your mapping. If your mapping contains multiple transformations, all the transformations will be displayed in the section in the dropdown. You can select the transformation for which you wish to see the data from the dropdown. The debugger shows
Okay.
each transformation per the logic you coded in the mapping. We've completed the setup of the debugger. Please note, debugger shows you the output of each transformation. It does not show the input of each transformation. To start debugger again, go to debugger and click next instance. As you notice, the arrow is currently at source qualifier. Since you are using debugger, you have all privileges to wait and check for data correctness. Once you're ready, click next instance to move on to the next one. Per your logic, the debugger will show you the output of filter transformation only if the data matches the filter condition. The first record matches the filter condition. Hence, you can notice the output of filter is shown in the instance. Click next instance
Okay.
on F10 to step the data towards next instance in your mapping flow. We'll get the data at output of expression transformation and then the target as shown in target instance. The debugger will start showing the movement of the data from each transformation under instance. Then at the end of the target, under target instance, keep pressing next instance or F10 to step the data towards the next instance in your mapping flow. Once all the data reaches the target, the debugger will automatically automatically shut down. If you have a large mapping and traversing through every transformation is tough work, you can actually select a particular transformation. You can select particular transformations at particular intervals to understand and narrow down the issue. This can be achieved using breakpoints. To set a breakpoint, click Edit Breakpoint. A new window will let you add breakpoints. Click Add to add a new breakpoint in the debugger. You can set a few more properties in this window. As you may have noticed, debugger is the best way to find the issues in the data movement across the map. Whenever you face some issues related to data loading in the target or mismatches in the targets, start a debugger and solve your issue. To summarize, we discussed about the reusable transformation, which allows you to reuse the transformation across the mappings. Then we spoke about the maplets, which
I may like to study that carefully because I think it's going to be used a lot
we also discussed about
for debugging maps.
errors in your mapping. In the next section, we'll talk about learning advanced aspects of target load plan. By using it, you can set up the priority of loading the target tables in a single mapping. We will also talk about comparing objects functionality. This allows you to compare two components, which is very helpful in understanding and maintaining the versions on the repository. We will also talk about dependencies and tracing level concept in Informatica Power Center.
Okay. Target load plan, what is that?
Welcome to Section 2, Learning Advanced Aspects. Previously, we discussed about reusable transformations, maplets, and debugger. In this section, we will continue to learn more advanced aspects and utilities of Designer Screen, such as target load plan, comparing objects, dependencies, and tracing level, target load plan. In this video, we'll learn the operation of target load plan to manage the constraints using it and to load the data into multiple targets in a mapping using target load plan. We'll start with managing the constraints. Target load plan allows us to maintain the sequence of execution of multiple mapping flows in the same mapping. While you work on multiple mappings in a complex scenario, a situation will manage you to put multiple data flow in a single mapping to justify the performance and complexity. A sample mapping depicting the above statement is created here as an example. If you execute the above mapping, the session may fail because of the primary key foreign key violation. Since the employee and department table have dependencies on each other, when you run the mapping containing both the flows, the process may fail if data violates the dependency. To avoid this issue, Informatica Power Center comes with a utility called target load plan. How do you plan to load the data into multiple targets in a mapping? We can load the data in a particular sequence in multiple targets in a mapping. To avoid the failure due to constraints, consider employees table data depends on the department's data because of the primary key and foreign key constraints. To satisfy the referential integrity, the department's table should be loaded first. Target load plan is useful when you wish to handle referential integrity while inserting, deleting, or updating data in the tables, which have primary key and foreign key relationships. To select target load plan, click Mapping. Select target load plan. A new window will pop up, representing the source and targets of two mappings. To set the target load plan, just move the target load group using the arrow provided in the window. Load the department's table before employees table. Select the SQ_departments and click the up arrow. This will make the department's table load before employees table, and we can avoid the failure. When we use target load plan, Informatica Power Center actually restricts the extraction of the data from the source qualifier. It waits for the first flow in the selected sequence to finish loading the data, and then starts extracting the data from the second source qualifier for its loading. In the next video, we'll talk about comparing objects.
Okay.
Hey guys. In this video, we'll learn how to compare different objects in a mapping, compare objects within a single repository, and comparing objects among multiple repositories. This utility allows you to compare two related components in Informatica Power Center. Informatica Power Center allows you to compare objects that are present within the same repository and across repository. You can compare sources, targets, transformations, maplets, and mappings in Power Center Designer under Source Analyzer, Target Designer, Transformation Developer, Maplet Designer, and Mapping Designer respectively. Let's consider
How does this work?
sources to compare. In Designer, click Sources, Compare. Browse Source 1 and Source 2, which you wish to compare. Now click Compare. You can check the different types of comparison options of two sources. Informatica Power Center Comparison Utility gives you the option to check differences in the repository and versions under General Column tab. The Table tab allows you to check the differences in the owner name and database type. The Column tab allows you to see the differences in the column and other properties related to the columns, such as data type and precision, and other constraints. And similar to this, when you compare targets and mappings, you can check out the differences using Compare Object Utility. This can be helpful in analysis of the components and to understand the difference between the recent and the existing component. Next video, we'll talk about dependencies.
I guess it's a fun tool.
Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll learn how to identify the dependencies amongst Informatica Power Center components, then identifying dependencies within a repository. Let's talk about the utility, which helps in identifying the dependencies amongst Informatica Power Center components. Consider you have a source, employees, in your repository, and you wish to find, within all the mappings, you used the source. Of course, you don't want to open all the mappings and workflows to find the source presence. The dependencies feature comes to your rescue. Right-click on the source and click Dependencies. A new pop-up window will ask you to select from the list of components in which you wish to see that the source employees is present. Select the components. I'll select all components and click OK. A new window will list all the components in which your source is used. In a similar fashion, you can check the dependencies for any other component. This is a simple feature, but very helpful. Next video, we'll learn tracing levels.
Nah, let's rewatch that again. What?
Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll learn how to identify the dependencies amongst Informatica Power Center components, then identifying dependencies within a repository. Let's talk about the utility, which helps in identifying the dependencies amongst Informatica Power Center components. Consider you have a source, employees, in your repository, and you wish to find, within all the mappings, you used the source. Of course, you don't want to open all the mappings and workflows to find the source presence. The dependencies feature comes to your rescue. Right-click on the source and click Dependencies. A new pop-up window will ask you to select from the list of components in which you wish to see the source employees. Ask you to select the
I didn't.
the source and click
There we go. So right-click. Dependencies. I see the option now.
A new pop-up window will ask you to select from the list of
Okay, that's what I missed.
that the source employees is present. Select the components. I'll select all components and click OK. A new window will list all the components in which your source is used. In a similar fashion, you can check the dependencies for any other component. This is a simple feature, but very helpful.
Yeah.
We'll learn tracing levels.
So I can see where it's actually being used. That's actually really useful.
Welcome back. In this video, we'll learn the types of tracing levels, how to maintain information in log files using tracing level, configure the transformation using tracing level. Now let's talk about tracing level concept. Tracing level is the level or amount of information you wish to maintain in the log files. In the video, getting accustomed to the workflow monitor screen, we saw how to see log files in workflow monitor. Tracing level defines the information which is saved in session logs. Hence, is very important because using the log information, we can find the issues and then rectify them. Tracing level is defined in the properties of transformation. Every transformation in Informatica has a default property called
tracing level.
Oh,
that's where I set in it.
Amount of information to session log files. Various types of
Normal,
terse, verbose, initialize, and verbose data. Selecting terse gives you the least amount of information in log files. It gives you the initialization information of Informatica components and various error messages along with notification or rejected data. If you select normal, integration service writes initialization and status of various information along with various errors encountered while processing. It also writes information about skipped rows due to transformation errors. This tracing level type does not write information at row level, but writes as a summary. Verbose initialize gives you everything, which normal tracing level gives, along with additional initialization details such as index and data files. It also
that may be too much.
About transformation. Verbose data is a type which gives the most detailed level of information. It consumes a lot of time and space since it logs information about each and every record passing through the mapping.
Oh my god.
Tracing level is very important. With regards to getting the proper log information, it's always recommended that in most cases you use normal, as it gives you enough information to rectify the error. If you
normal seems to be the way to go, unless I'm debugging something.
Integration service takes correspondingly more time to write, hence could hamper the performance. In this section, we talked about how to manage the constraints using target load plan, then load the data into multiple targets in a mapping by using target load plan, how to compare different objects in a mapping, identifying dependencies within a repository, how to maintain and configure information in log files using tracing level. Next section, the workflow manager screen and the various tasks present and other advanced features.
Types of tasks.
Hey guys, welcome back to a new section. Previously, we discussed reusable transformations in Informatica. We also discussed various utilities present in Informatica Power Center. In this section, we'll talk about the various tasks and advanced topics of the Workflow Manager screen. We'll start with a discussion on various tasks. Later, we'll talk about worklet, parameter files, and scheduling, as well as other utilities in Workflow Manager, types of tasks. Now we're going to learn what task is and the types of tasks, and how to create various tasks in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Starting with various tasks. Tasks are basic building blocks of workflows. Every task has a different functionality, as every transformation in Designer. We need to use a task per our requirement in Workflow or Worklet. Tasks can be created as reusable or non-reusable components. You can create a reusable task in Task Developer and non-reusable in Workflow Manager. Let's get a brief understanding of the different tasks we have. Session. It's used to execute a mapping. Email. Used to send success or failure email notifications. Command. Execute Unix Perl scripts or commands. It can also be used for executing DOS commands in Windows. Timer. Used to add some time gap or to add delay between two tasks. Assignment. To assign a value to a workflow variable. Control. Used to control the flow of workflow by stopping or aborting the workflow in case of some error. Decision. Used to check the status of multiple tasks. Hence control the execution of workflow based on the condition defined in decision path.
It's like an if and a switch case.
File watcher task. Event raise. Used to trigger user-defined events. Link. Used to link tasks to each other. You can also define conditions in the link to control the execution of workflow. Before we move on, let's talk about an important topic. Let's say we have two workflows. WF Workflow 1 and WF Workflow 2. WF Workflow 1 contains a session task and a command contains a session and command task. We have a requirement that WF Workflow 1, upon successful completion, should trigger WF Workflow 2. This means that Workflow 2 has a dependency on Workflow 1, so Workflow 2 should run after Workflow 1 is successfully complete. A couple of important terms: parent workflow and top-level workflow. For session and command task, WF Workflow 1 will be called a parent workflow. Workflow 2 will act as a parent workflow for session task and email task. For WF Workflow 2, WF Workflow 1 will be called a top-level workflow because WF Workflow 2 is in turn triggered by Workflow 2. Because there's a dependency set up on Workflow 1 and Workflow 2, understand an important aspect here. Workflow 1 will be successful only upon successful completion of Workflow 2. This task can be identified in the monitor screen. After we create the task, we can configure the options on the General tab of every task. Every task has similar properties related to controlling workflow in the General tab. Fail parent if this task fails. When this option is checked, the workflow or worklet will fail if the task in that workflow
interesting.
If this task does not run. The workflow and worklet will fail if the task does not run. Disable this task. The task in the workflow or worklet will become invisible and will not run in the sequence. Treat input link as and or. When you check this option, Informatica Power Center will run the task if all or one of the input link conditions are true. This is nothing but and or operator in the properties. Next, we'll talk about command task.
I get it. So I can call other workflows within workflows.
Command task is. Then we'll create a command task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Okay, let's get started. Command task is used to execute shell scripts or standalone shell commands or DOS commands. You can define one or more commands or scripts in a command task. If you define multiple commands or scripts in the same command task, the task executes the commands in sequence. You can define Unix Perl commands for Unix servers or DOS commands for Windows servers. If your Informatica server is installed on Unix operating system, you'll be able to execute Unix commands. If Informatica server is installed on Windows, then you can use DOS commands. To create a command task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer, click Tasks, then Create. From the list of tasks, select Command. Specify the name of the task. We'll call it CMD_task_name. Click Create, then Done. The task shows in the Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Use the link task to connect Start Task to Command Task. Double-click the Command Task to open it in Edit View. Click Commands. Add a new
What is the command at?
option.
Interesting.
We'll use copy_file as the command name. Click the Edit button to open the command editor and write the command which you wish to execute. Since we're using a Windows-based server, we can write copy.
Copy. PP or nah, that's for Linux.
In sequence. With this in mind, we successfully started the command task. Next video, we'll take a look at email.
The email. How do you configure an email server on this app? Do I have to give it credentials for Google Mail?
Welcome back. In this video, we'll learn what email task is. Then we'll create an email task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Email task is used to send success or failure email notifications. You can use email task to send an email notification in order to inform a success or failure of a particular path of the workflow. You can use email server to send the email notification. Your admin team will configure the email server with Informatica to send the notification. Once you configure
I don't have an email server.
The email is sent directly from your mailbox. To create an email task in Workflow Manager, click Tasks, click Create. From the list of tasks, select Email. Then
email.
Name. We'll use TM_task_name. Click Create, then Done. The email task appears in the Workflow Manager. Use the link task to connect Start Task with the email raise. Double-click the email task, then click Properties. Add the details in the email task.
Username. name, subject, and text.
Send the email notification. If you wish to send the notification to
Okay.
users, you can separate the email IDs by commas. Email subjects. Mention the subject of the email which you
Yes.
wish to send. Email text. Click to open the email editor to enter the text you wish to send. You can attach the log file, workflow name, repository, etc. using the variables in the email task editor. These options are currently disabled because the email task is not configured. Next video, we'll study the event task.
The event task. Okay.
Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll learn what an event task is, also an event wait task, and finally an event raise. We'll also create an event wait task and an event raise task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Let's talk about the event tasks, the event wait, and event raise. The event is simply a functionality which you wish to implement in Workflow. Informatica Power Center has some system-defined event.
Of course, usually used as a file watcher.
Types, predefined or user-defined.
Okay.
Predefined, also referred to as system-defined, is generally called a file watch event. You can use this task to wait for a specified file at a specific location. Once the file arrives at the path mentioned, the event wait or file watcher triggers the rest of the task in the workflow. A user-defined event means that you can create an event of your own based on a requirement. An event raise task is nothing but a sequence of tasks in the workflow. Before you can use user-defined events under event tasks, you need to create the event at workflow level. Open the workflow in Workflow Manager, for which you wish to add a user-defined event. Click Workflow, Edit, Events. You can add a new event by specifying a name. Let's call it trigger_event. Click OK. Let's talk about the event tasks present in Informatica. There are two types. Event wait. This waits for a particular event to occur. You can define the event for which the event wait task should wait. Once triggered, the event wait task will wait for an infinite time for the specified event. As soon as the event occurs, the event wait succeed triggers the next task in the workflow. In the event wait task, you can define a system-defined event or a user-defined
Okay.
event. Event wait. Event raise.
Oh,
triggers a
event
particular
wait
event in
is to
workflow.
wait for a system-defined or a user-defined
Create an
event.
wait task in Workflow Manager. Click Task, Create. From the list of tasks, select Event
Event
then
wait.
specify the name. We'll call it EW_task_name. Click Create and click Done. The event wait task appears in the Workflow Manager. Use the link task to connect the start task with the event wait. Double-click the event wait task to open the task in Edit View. If you wish to use
It's like a trigger.
specify the path and the file name in the option. For our reference, we added a predefined event called a file watch event. We added Unix /proj/src files /source_file.txt as an event.
Okay.
The event wait task will wait at the defined Unix /proj/src files location. For the source_file.txt file, it'll wait until the file occurs. If you wish to use a user-defined name, click on the Add New Event option. Select the event we created in the workflow level. Click OK. To create an event raise, click Task, Create. From the list, select Event Raise Task, then specify the name. For our reference,
Event
call it
raise.
Event Raise Task, ER_trigger_task. Click Create and Done.
Oh, in order to trigger the event.
Use the link task to connect the start task with the event
Okay.
raise. Double-click the event raise and click Properties. Add a new user-defined event, which we created earlier. Please note, you can use the event wait and event raise tasks individually as well. Next video, we'll study the timer task.
So when you execute that workflow, you are going to run.
In this video,
You are going
we'll
to
talk about
activate
as well as
the other
timer. We're gonna
workflow.
create one in Workflow Manager. In the previous video, we studied an event task. Now we're going to talk about timer. Timer task is used to add time delay between the executions of two tasks. In other words, you can specify the time in the timer task to wait before the process triggers the next task in Workflow. Another option in the timer task, it allows you to start the next task after a particular time gap in the workflow. To create a timer task in Workflow Manager, click Tasks, then Create. From the list of tasks, select Timer, then specify the name. We'll be using tm_task_name. Click Create, then Done. Now the timer task appears in the Workflow Manager. Use the link task to connect start task to timer. Double-click the timer task to open the timer in Edit View. Click Timer tab. Based on your requirement, select the relative or absolute time option. Click OK. The timer tasks have two types of settings. Absolute
Relative
This allows you to
time
specify the time when you want the
from
next
the
task to
start of
in
this
the workflow.
task.
Relative time. This enables you to start the next task by comparing the start time on the timer task. If you mention relative time as 10 minutes, Informatica Power Center will wait for 10 minutes at the timer task before it triggers the next task in the workflow. For our reference, we selected relative time in the above image. Based on the selection, our timer task will start the execution after 10 minutes from the end of the previous one. Now we saw how timer task works. In this section, we discussed the various tasks. We talked about the types of tasks, which are command, email, event wait, event raise, and timer. In the next section, we'll talk about more tasks, such as control, decision, session, assignment, and link task.
Oh my god. A lane task.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new section, working with other tasks. Previously, we spoke about some of the tasks, like command, email, timer, and event raise. Now we'll talk about a few more tasks. They are link, decision, assignment, control, and session task properties. Now we'll talk about a link task, and we'll also show how to create a link task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Link task is used to control the execution of the workflow. You can have multiple branches in the workflow, which can be triggered using the link task. By now, you must have understood that we use a link task to connect two tasks.
Okay.
Also, to connect start task with other tasks in workflow. You can define the condition in a link task, using which you can control the flow of workflow. You can define various conditions based on the tasks from which you're connecting the link. To create a link task, in order to connect two tasks, click Task and select Link Task. Drag the link to the tasks you wish to have linked.
Yeah, you link
Set a
them.
condition in link task. Double-click link task and set a condition.
Oh.
You wish to trigger a second task.
I didn't know the
Complete it
link
successfully.
has
To achieve it,
properties.
double-click the link task. Then double-click the status of task 1 and mention its condition succeeded. Click OK. With this
Oh,
condition,
it sees
your
it sees.
one is completed successfully. That's because we're connecting session
Oh.
task to the email task. Because we're connecting session task to email task, link task gives you various options, like checking the source failed rows, checking the source success rows, target failed rows, target success rows, filter transaction errors, etc. In the next video, we'll talk about decision task.
So the links actually had properties. They are not just cute
We'll
lines.
also look at how to create a decision task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Okay, let's begin. You can control the execution of the workflow by defining the condition in the decision task. Decision allows you to specify the condition, which you can control the execution of branches in a workflow. In other words, you can check the condition of multiple tasks, and based on that, you can decide whether you wish to trigger the next task or not. Consider the workflow created for reference. As you can
Okay.
see, the session task should be triggered only if all the 3 command task status is successful. We can define the condition in the 3 link tasks, but the problem in that case would be that the session task will be triggered even if 1 command task is successful. This issue can be resolved using decision task. You can define the condition in decision which will
Yeah.
make the session task execute only if all 3 tasks.
Whoever
are successful.
finishes
Create a decision
first
task
is going to
and
activate the
link task.
last
Create
one.
from the list. Select decision decision and specify the name of the task.
Decision.
Let's use DEC
Task
underscore task
name.
underscore name for our reference. Click create.
DEC
then click done.
decision,
The decision task
okay.
appears in the workflow. Use link task to connect the command task to the decision,
Okay.
and then decision task to session. In our case, we're implementing a scenario where the session task should be triggered only after successful execution of the 3 command tasks. Double-click the decision task to open the task in Edit View. Click Properties and mention the condition under Value. Per our requirement, we define the condition as the status of command task 1 as succeeded, and the status of command task 2 as succeeded, and the status of command 3 as succeeded. Click OK. This will set a required property. Therefore, in the decision task, we're checking the status of all the 3 tasks, and based on that, if all the 3 has completed successfully, then the session task will trigger.
Okay, let's go back a little bit. I got
We define
distracted.
the condition as the status of command task.
There we go.
To open the task should be triggered only after successful execution of the
Yes.
3 command tasks. Double-click
Okay,
the decision
show
task
me.
to open the task in Edit View. Click Properties and mention the condition under Value. Per our requirement, we define the condition
And
as the
here
status
we
of command
define the
task 1 as succeeded, and
expression.
the status of command task 2 as succeeded,
And
the status of command
succeeded.
3 as succeeded. Click
Oh,
OK. This will set
okay.
a required property. Therefore, in the decision task, we're checking the status of all the 3 tasks, and based on that,
Yeah.
if all the 3 has completed successfully, then the session task will trigger. Next video, we'll talk about the assignment task.
Oh, interesting. This is really interesting, actually. So the only thing I'm missing is how to schedule execution. So I don't need to be there to click the button.
Create one in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Let's talk about assignment task. It's used to assign a value to user-defined variables in Workflow. Before you can define a variable in assignment task, you need to add the variable in the Workflow Manager. To add the variable, open the workflow for which you wish to define a user-defined variable. Click Workflow, Edit, Variables. Click Add a new variable option. To add a new variable to the workflow, the new variable created is $new variable 1. You can also change the name of the variable and its data type. Click OK. Since we created a workflow level variable, we can now create an assignment task. To create an assignment task, click Task, Create. From the list of tasks, select Assignment Task in Workflow Manager, then specify the name of it. For our reference, we're using the name of the assignment task, AMT_assign_value. Click Create, then click Done. Now the task appears in Workflow. Use the link task to connect the start task to assignment.
Oh.
Open it in Edit View. Click Expressions. Add a new expression. Select the user-defined variable you created at the workflow level. We added $new variable 1. Assign the value which you wish to assign to the variable. We assign the total success rows in the session task to the
Yeah.
Click OK. This will assign the number of success
The
rows. for the
number
session
of
task to the
success
variable.
rows.
$new variable 1. This variable can also be used further in the workflows.
Task.
Next video, we'll talk about the control task.
Oh. What's the name of this task again? Assignment task. There we go. So I am assigning a value into a variable, I guess.
Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about
Let's rewatch that. It's really short.
Manager or Task Developer. Let's talk about assignment task. It's used to assign a value to user-defined variables in Workflow. Before you can define a variable in assignment task, you need to add the variable in the Workflow Manager. To add the variable, open the workflow for which you wish to define a user-defined variable. Click Workflow, Edit, Variables. Click Add a new variable option. To add a new variable to the workflow, the new variable created is $new
So
variable.
that's where I
Also
create the
change the name
variable.
and its data type. Click OK. Since we created a
Okay.
workflow level variable, we can now create an assignment task. To create an assignment
Oh,
task, click
it's not available until I create a variable.
then specify the name of it. For our reference, we're using the name of the assignment task,
Assignment task, assign value.
Then click Done. Now the task appears in Workflow. Use the link task to connect the start task to assignment. Double-click the assignment
Okay.
task to open it in Edit View. Click Expressions. Add a new expression. Select the user-defined variable you created at the
That's the
workflow.
variable.
Add $new variable 1. Assign the value
Yeah.
which you wish to assign to the variable. We assign the total success rows in the session task. to the
Oh,
variable.
nice.
Click OK. This will assign the number of success rows from the session task to the variable.
Okay.
$new variable 1. This variable can also be used further in the workflows. Next video, we'll talk about the control task.
Oh, control task. So I guess I can output from that task into another task
Hey guys, in this
in
video,
order
we'll talk about
to
control
store
tasks.
logs or something like that.
How to create a control task in Workflow Manager or Task Developer. Let's begin. Control task is used to control the execution of the workflow. You can stop, abort, or fail the parent workflow or top-level workflow by defining the appropriate condition in control task. The control task acts as a green or red signal. If you use a control task in a branch in a workflow, and if everything is moving smoothly, for example, if there are no issues with the process, the control task will not even trigger. It'll act as invisible. But if the process catches up with the issue, the control task will take the control, and based on the
Okay.
selected properties, it'll stop, abort, or fail the workflow or the top level. To create a control task, click Task, Create. From the list of tasks, select Control, then specify the name of it. For our reference, we'll name the control task CNTL_abort_workflow. Click Create and click Done. The control task now appears in Workflow Manager. Use the link task to connect the start task to the control, or whichever task you want to connect to the control. Double-click Control to open the task in Edit View. Click Properties. From the dropdown, select a particular option from the dropdown list. Per your requirement, various options are present in the control task.
Fail
The control task will
me.
show the failed status in the Workflow Monitor if the task is triggered. Fail Parent. The workflow will
Fail
see the status as
parent.
fail in Workflow Monitor. The parent workflow for the task will see the status as a fail in the Workflow Monitor. Stop Parent. The workflow will stop and you see the status as stopped in Workflow Monitor. Abort Parent. The workflow will abort and you see the status as aborted. Fail top-level workflow. If this option is selected, the top-level workflow will fail and you see the status as
Oh, okay.
top-level workflow. The top-level workflow will stop.
This is the rise exception for Informatica.
And you see the status as aborted. Understand that in this scenario, when you trigger the workflow, everything is moving smoothly. And if the decision task is successful, the control task will not even trigger. But in case the decision task fails, the control task comes into picture. And based on
Yeah.
the it'll fail, abort, or stop the process.
Fail
Next,
me,
we'll
okay.
talk about session task properties.
Interesting. So the advanced, so-called advanced features are the easiest to learn.
Let's get to it. Previously, we discussed basic properties of the session.
However,
Session
you
task
need the
Session
basics
task is the most widely used
down.
amongst the tasks in Workflow Manager. As you may have seen earlier, there are a lot of properties which we can define in session tasks.
Okay.
In previous videos, we discussed some of those properties. We talked about the mapping tab of the session task in the previous videos. We also learned about providing source, target, and lookup transformation details for moving the data.
Okay.
We'll discuss the remaining properties in this video. Double-click on session task to see the various tabs. The various tabs of session task are General tab and Properties tab. We already talked about the General tab in previous videos. Here's a description of the properties. Mentioned below are the properties descriptions. Write backward compatible session log file. Select this if you wish to write the generated session logs to a file. If you select it, IPC creates a log file. Otherwise, it generates a normal session log file. Session log file name. You define the log file name. name. The default name is session_name.log. You can also define the parameter in this option. We discuss the parameter file in detail in the
Okay.
next section. When you define the parameter, pass the value from the parameter file. Session log file directory. You define the log file directory. You can also define parameters.
Wait a
in this option.
minute.
When you define the parameter, we'll talk about a session task. Also the various properties of the session task.
I already used that.
Discuss basic properties of the session task. Session
Yeah.
task is used to execute a mapping. Session task
A
is
mapping.
the most widely used task amongst the tasks in Workflow Manager. As you may have seen earlier, there are a lot of properties.
Okay. So it's to execute
We
maps.
discuss some of those properties. We talk
And
about
those are the ones I've been running this entire time.
transformation details for moving the data. We'll discuss the remaining properties in this video. Double-click on Session Task to see the various tabs. The various tabs of Session Task are General tab and Properties tab. We already talked about the General tab in previous videos. Here's a description of the properties. Mentioned below are the properties descriptions. Write backward compatible session log file. Select this if you wish to write the generated session logs to a file. If you select it, IPC creates a log file.
Okay.
Otherwise, it generates a normal session log file. Session log file name. You define the log file name. The default name is session_name.log. You can also define the parameter in this option. We discuss the parameter file in details in the next section. When you define the parameter, pass the value from the parameter file. Session log file directory. You define the log file directory. You can also define the parameter in this option. When you define the parameter,
Oh,
pass the value
Unity is messing up.
file name. If you use the parameters and variables in your code, you need to pass the value from parameter file. You can define the parameter file name and path here. We'll discuss this option in the next video. Enable test load. Select this to allow only a few records to pass through the mapping. This is useful when you're in the testing phase of your project. Number of rows to test. When you select enable test load, you can define the number of records you wish to flow from mapping. Say you have 10,000 records to process. You can check enable test load and mention the number of records you wish to test. So if you define 100, Informatica will only process 100 records out of 10,000. $source connection value. Define the database connection value here. Consider your database connection name Oracle. If you define Oracle at this place, you can select $source in mapping tab for a source connection.
Yeah, you need to define the connection there.
Define the database connection value here. Consider your database connection name Oracle.
Oh,
If you define Oracle at this place, you can select $source in mapping tab for a target connection. Treat source rows as. This allows you to treat records as insert, update, delete, or data-driven for the records coming from the source. The default property is insert. This indicates all records coming from source will be inserted into target. Data-driven property is selected when you use the update strategy transformation in mapping. Commit.
Oh, okay.
You can select either source or target-based commit type. The default property is target-based. If you select source, Informatica commits the data into target based on the commit interval and flush latency interval. Flush latency is the time interval you wish to commit. If you define flush latency as 5 seconds and commit interval as 10,000, Informatica will commit the data to target based on whichever interval is reached first. Flush
Okay,
latency is a
okay.
property defined by
Either by time or by number of rows.
The data is committed based on the commit interval, so we don't frequently use the flush latency property. If
Yeah,
you
it's way faster that way
commit interval, commit on
to
interval. This property indicates that the records will
commit by
the file
bulks.
contains a lesser number of records than the commit interval defined. Rollback transactions on errors. When you select this, Informatica will roll back the records at the next commit interval. This only happens if there are any non-fatal errors. Recovery strategy. Using this, you can recover the session task if the session happens to fail. Various options are available in this property, which you can select based on your requirement. Fail session and continue the workflow. If you select this, you cannot recover your session task. The session will fail if it encounters an error, but it'll continue the workflow. Restart task.
Okay.
The session task restarts when the workflow is recovered after a failure. Resume from last checkpoint. Informatica saves the start of the session task and resumes the session from the last checkpoint. Java class path. If you wish to use a different type of Java packages in Java transformation. Moving on to performance properties. DTM buffer size. This indicates how much memory you wish to assign for the DTM processes. When you create a session, Informatica assigns a specific value for the DTM. You can set the value to auto, so Informatica keeps on increasing the value automatically if needed. DTM stands for Data Transformation Manager. DTM has a responsibility to check whether all the system requirements like repository, integration service, and cache memory is available before it accepts the data and processes it. This is the first component which gets triggered when you run the workflow. Collect performance data. Informatica collects the performance data as it runs the session. Usually, you do not select this option unless you really need to find the performance. This option can actually hamper your performance in some way because it takes time to collect the performance details. So unless it's very important, do not check this option. Write performance data to repository. You can save the performance collected for session run to repository. That way, you can check the details later. This again hampers the performance. Unless you really need it, do not check this option. Incremental aggregation. If you wish to make use of incremental aggregation, check this. We'll discuss this in more details in further videos. Reinitialize aggregate cache. When you use this, Informatica stores the data of the previous run in cache memory. We'll discuss this more in later videos. Enable high precision. Informatica processes the decimal data to precision of 28 bytes. Usually, this option is left unchecked. Session retry on deadlock. Informatica tries to load the data in target. If it finds the deadlock, instead of giving an error, it tries to load the data again. This option is available only for a normal load, not for bulk load. Allow temporary view for pushdown. Informatica creates a temporary view in the database when you use a pushdown feature. Pushdown authentication is a feature which we'll discuss with performance in later videos. Allow temporary sequence for pushdown. Informatica creates a temporary sequence in this database when you use a pushdown feature. Allow pushdown for user incompatible connections. This indicates that user through which you're accessing the database used in the session has read permission. If the user does not have read permission, the session task fails. Session sort order. The default sort order is binary. Let's talk about the setting under config object tab. Constraint-based load ordering. If you check this, the data is loaded into the target based on primary and foreign key relationship wherever possible. Cache lookup function. This is related to the lookup transformation functionality. By default, lookup transformation performs row-by-row operation. If you check this, Informatica overrides the mapping level lookup settings. Default buffer block size. This specifies the size of buffer block you wish to assign for data cache, as well as index cache movement from source to target. By default, it's set to auto, so the size is automatically increased as required. Line sequential buffer length. This is related to the number of bytes in an individual record in a flat file. The default value is 1024 bytes. If your records have larger byte length, increase the value per your requirement. Maximum memory allowed for auto memory attributes. This setting is related to the
500 megabytes.
cache at runtime. Maximum percentage of total memory allowed for auto memory attributes. This is related to the percentage of memory allocated to session cache at runtime. Additional concurrent pipelines for lookup cache creation. This is related to the creation of concurrent cache by creating additional pipeline for lookup transformation. By default, the value is set to auto. This indicates the value will be decided at runtime. Informatica caches the data either concurrently or sequentially. If you set the property to 0, Informatica processes the lookup cache sequentially. Custom properties. You can customize some of the default properties for session. Usually we don't need to change the settings. Pre-build lookup cache.
Interesting.
Set this property to auto. Date time format string. The format of the date which is adopted if you use date functions in Informatica. Pre-85 timestamp compatibility. If you check this, Informatica will accept the timestamp used in the version below 8.5 of Informatica Power Center. Let's talk about the log option setting under the config object tab. Save session log by. You can save the session log file by either session runs or timestamp. If the option is set as session run, Informatica saves a specific number of session log files. You can set the number of log files to save in the option save session log for these runs. If you set it to timestamp, Informatica saves the session log file by appending the timestamp. timestamp to the log file name. When you save the history of session log files, you can use the files to compare the files in case of some errors. Save session log for these runs. This allows you to define the number of session log files you wish to save to maintain a history of log files. By default, the session log files are overwritten. The max number of history you can maintain is 2,147,483,647. Session log file max size. You define the max size of the session log file. If the file size exceeds the value defined in this property, a new log file is created. Default value is 0. Session log file max time period. You define the max number of hours for which the information is written in a session log file. If the max time exceeds the value defined in this property, a new log is created. The default is maximum partial session log files. You define the max number of log files to save. If the number of files exceeds the value defined in this property, the oldest file is overwritten. Writer commit statistics log frequency. Define the frequency at which the commit statistics is written to the session log. The default value is 1. Writer commit statistics log interval. Define the time interval at which commit statistics are written to the session log. The time is defined in minutes. Let's talk about
in minutes.
under the config object. Stop on errors. This defines how many errors you do not wish to fail the workflow. If you set it as 5, Informatica will keep on running until it encounters 5 error rows. On the 6th, Informatica will fail the workflow. You can override the tracing level set in
that could be very hard to debug, because if I set that up
take the tracing level as normal, then reject the setting on mapping.
and then it fails and I don't know why,
Select this to define what should happen if there are any pre or post
it's
session.
going to be hard to debug that.
The session will fail if it encounters an error in stored procedure. If you select continue, the session will continue even if it encounters an error.
Oh, okay.
Session command task error. This is when you use a pre-session command task in session task. If you select the stop option, the session will fail if it encounters an error. If you select continue, the session will continue even if it does encounter an error.
Okay.
SQL error. Use this when you use pre or post SQL command in session task.
Yes.
Select stop, the session will fail if it encounters an error. If you select continue, the session will continue even if it does encounter an error. Error log type. Use this to define the type of error log to be generated. The available options are flat file, relational database, or none. The default value is none. If you select this option, Informatica will write the error messages to the files or the database.
Oh.
DB connection. If you select error log type as relational
Yeah, I need to set a connection.
database connection details for error log. Error log table name prefix. Mention the table name you created for storing error logs. Error log file directory. If you select error log type as flat,
Yeah, where to save it as a file. Yeah, that's fine.
Error log file name. You can mention the name of the error log file. Log row data. You can save the row level transformation data into the log. Log source row data. You can save the source row level data into the log. By default,
Okay.
the data is not saved. Data column delimiter. You can define the delimiter to be used when saving row data and source row data. Default delimiter is pipeline. Let's talk about the partitioning option properties under the config object. Partitioning is a very advanced property which is not available in the commercial license. You also need to buy a separate license to enable the portioning property in Informatica. Dynamic partitioning. You can enable the partitioning option when you run the process. The default setting is disabled. This is available only if you have a partitioning license available. Various options available are based on number of partitions, based on number of nodes in grid, based on source partitioning, and based on number of CPUs. Number of partitions. Define the number of partitions you wish to set. Default is 1. Mapping tab. Define the session, target and lookup transformation path, or connection. We discussed this tab in previous videos. Components tab. Define the pre or post command and email tasks. This acts as a replacement of the command and email. You can use this option only as a shortcut. Pre-session command. Use this as a replacement of command task used before session task. You can define reusable or non-reusable type. If you select non-reusable, define the shell command you wish to mention in command. Informatica executes the pre-session command before it executes the session. If you define the pre-session command task, you no longer require the command task here. Post-session success command. Similar to pre-session, you can use this option as a replacement of post-session success command task. Used after session, you can define the type reusable or non-reusable. Define the shell command or DOS command you wish to mention in command task. Informatica executes the post-session command after successful completion of session task. You don't need to define any conditions in the link. Post-session failure command. You can use this as a replacement of post-session failure command task used after session task. You can define the type reusable or non-reusable. Define the shell or DOS command you wish to mention in the command task. Informatica executes the post-session command if the session task fails. Unsuccess email. Use this as a replacement of post-session success email task used after session. Define the type reusable or non. Define the email properties you wish to mention in the email task. Informatica executes the post-session email after successful execution of session task. Failure email. Use this as a replacement of post-session failure email task used after session task.
Yeah, in case it fails.
Also define the email property you wish to mention in the email task. Informatica executes the post-session email if the session task fails. Pre-session variable assignment. You can assign values to various parameters, as well as variables used in mapping. Also variables used in mapping and session before the session executes. Post-session on success variable assignment. You can assign values to various parameters and variables used in workflow and worklet after the session executes successfully. Post-session on failure variable assignment. Assign values to various parameters and variables used in workflow and worklet if the session task fails. Metadata extension tab. Define the metadata extension related properties. We usually don't use this tab. This is used to define general information related to the workflow or to define the project.
Oh, just adding your own
In this
metadata.
section, we talked about the various aspects of Workflow Manager screen. We saw the detailed properties of the session task, along with other tasks. Next time, we'll talk about the advanced features of Workflow Manager screen, such as schedulers, reusable tasks, worklets.
That's what I'm interested in.
Welcome to Section 5, Schedulers, Reusable Tasks, and Worklets. Previously, we spoke about the different tasks present in Informatica Workflow Manager. We learned all the properties of various tasks, and learned to create various tasks. In this section, we'll talk about various advanced aspects of Workflow Manager screen, such as schedulers, reusable tasks, worklets, and parameter files. Configuring internal scheduler. We'll talk about how to create a schedule in the Workflow Manager, defining frequency of execution of the workflow using scheduler. Different options present on the schedule screen. Let's get started. Scheduling is one of the most important aspects of any technology.
Yeah.
We need to schedule the process so that it executes at a specified interval regularly. Using the schedule, you can define the frequency at which you wish to execute the workflow. Based on the frequency you define, workflow will automatically trigger. Informatica Power Center comes with an internal scheduler. To create a scheduler, open the workflow in Workflow Manager for which you wish to define the schedule. Click Workflows, Schedulers. On the new window, add a scheduler. Click New. In the new window, specify the name of the scheduler as per your requirement, and click Schedule.
Yeah,
Define
sure.
Schedule frequency as per your requirement, and click OK. Let's
On
discuss the various
demand.
options on the schedule screen.
Okay.
Run on integration service initialization. When this option is checked, the workflow
Whoa.
will trigger as per your defined schedule. Various options under schedule option gets enabled, and you can specify the time and frequency at which you wish to execute the workflow. Run on demand. This is where you can run the workflow manually. Run continuously. The workflow will keep on running continuously from the time you define the start time. Run once. This indicates that the workflow will run only once at the scheduled time. Run every. You can schedule to run the workflow at a particular interval. If you wish to run the workflow every day, mention 1. 1 under days and define the start and end date. Customize repeat. Customize the schedule at which you wish to run your workflow. This is helpful.
Oh,
in this scenario where
perfect.
You may only need to run your workflow on Mondays. Start date, start time. This indicates the date and time for which you wish to schedule your workflow. End on indicates the end date which you wish to schedule. End after indicates the number of times you wish to let the workflow run. Forever. If this is checked, the schedule will keep on running forever with no end date. In the next video, we'll talk about reusable tasks.
That's wonderful. I guess similar to Maplets, reusable task is going to be converted.
And how to use reusable tasks. Similar
Yeah.
to reusable transformation we learned in Volume 1. Tasks
Yeah, I guess that
reusable
much.
tasks can be reused in multiple workflows and multiple times in the same workflow. The concept is exactly similar to the reusable transformations. Reusable tasks can be created in Task Developer or in Workflow Designer. To create reusable tasks by Task Developer, in the Workflow Manager screen, click Task, then click Create. From the list of tasks, select the required one and click OK. Please note, you can only make 3 tasks reusable: Session, Command, and Email. Others cannot be made reusable. Once you add the task gets added under Tasks in Navigator. The task can be drawn in the workflow for reusable purpose. To make an existing task reusable, double-click it, which you wish to make reusable, and check the option.
Make
The pop-up
reusable.
window will mention the process is non-reversible. Click OK.
Okay.
This will now appear under Tasks in Navigator. As you may notice,
Oh.
the reusable task can be identified by the green icon below the task. This concludes our learning on reusable tasks. In the next video, we'll talk about Worklets.
That was Worklets. Oh, I guess Worklets are the same as Maplets, but for Workflow Manager.
Worklets are, and how to create them in Workflow Manager. A group of tasks that can be reused are called worklets. Worklets are similar to Maplets in Mapping Designer. As
Yeah.
seen previously, you can use Maplets in place of multiple
I can guess that
transformations,
much.
Worklets in place of multiple tasks. When you wish to reuse the functionality implemented using multiple tasks, Worklet is your answer. Since reusing a reusable task itself is a rare occurrence, as you do not frequently reuse the logic of individual tasks, that makes using a worklet a more rare occurrence in Informatica. Worklet can change
Yeah.
over time. You can reuse some existing functionality. Similar to Workflow, Worklet should also start with a start task. To create a worklet, in Worklet Manager, click Worklets, Create. Specify the name of the worklet. For our reference, we'll call it WLT_worklet. Click Done. The start task appears in the Worklet Manager. Drag the existing reusable task from Navigator under Sessions or Tasks in your worklet. We drag the existing reusable session to your worklet. Use the link task to connect the start task to the session. The small green icon at the bottom of Session Task represents a reusable task. The worklet is
Okay.
added in Navigator under the Worklets. With this in mind, we learn how to work on Worklets in Workflow Manager.
Oh.
Next video, we'll talk about configuring file list.
File list. That's new.
Hey guys! In this video, we'll talk about what a file list is, how to configure direct file types, and how to configure indirect file types. Let's talk about file list. It's a concept which provides you an easier way to merge the data and load into the target. As the name suggests, the name is specifically related to flat files. This is an indirect way of passing the source file. We saw earlier that we defined the source path and source file name under the mapping tab in the session task. There's another property in the session task called source file type. That's where you can select the direct or indirect
Direct,
option. If you select
indirect.
direct, Informatica directly goes to the defined source file directory path and extracts the data from the file name, defined by the source file name option. When you select the file type as indirect, Informatica reads the data from the file mentioned indirectly. Let's look at an example to understand the concept. Consider you've been provided with 3 source files with the same structure but different data. The names of the source files are C:/file1.txt,
Yeah.
file2.txt, and E:/file3.txt. The requirement is to merge the data into a target file. You can achieve the requirement using union transformation. Indirect file type helps achieve the same requirement in an easier way. Remember to implement the file list concept. The files you are willing to merge should have exactly the same data type. To implement the file list, we'll create another file with the name file_list.txt. Then add the names of all the 3 files with the path in the file_list.txt. The
Okay.
file is in session task for indirect file. As you can understand, we create another file that contains the names of the other 3 source files. The mapping in this scenario will be as simple as source, source qualifier, target. The structure for the source in this scenario will be similar to any other source. As we mentioned earlier, the source structure for all the 3 files to be used in the file list should be exactly the same. When you define the source file type as indirect, Informatica reads the name of the files from
File list.
then extracts the data one by one from the files mentioned in file_list.txt. This way, the data will be appended in the target. It's very important.
And I don't even need to build a maplet for that or a map.
Incremental aggregation.
Interesting.
Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about what incremental aggregation is and how to perform it. Let's get started. The concept of incremental aggregation is related to aggregator transformation. When you have data that's increasing incrementally and existing data remains constant, you can utilize the incremental aggregation functionality in order to achieve the output faster and enhance performance. When you select incremental aggregation in session properties, Informatica saves the result of the last run in cache and replace the value in the next run, hence enhance the performance. To understand the concept, let's take an example. Consider you have a file with a salary of employees present and you wish to get the sum of the salaries of all employees. Let's say we have 3 employees in the January month, 6 employees in February, and 9 in March. As you may notice, the data is increasing in the file. The first file with the data of employees present is in January. Second file with data is the February month. Third file is March. To get the sum of the salaries of all employees, we'll use aggregator transformation. Since the number of records is increasing, the time taken for calculation will also increase. Please note that the previous data is not changing. Only new data is added to the file. To save time, we use the concept of incremental aggregation. The option is
Incremental aggregation. Just adding the differences.
located in the tabs of session task. When you run the file for the January month, aggregator transformation will calculate the values of the 3 records and give the corresponding output, which is 6,000 in our case. If you do not check incremental aggregation, Informatica again calculates the 6 records in the file for February, then gives the result 9,000. If you use the incremental aggregation option, aggregator cache will save the value of the last run, which is 6,000. If you run the same process for February, Informatica replaces the first 3 records of the file with the value stored in cache, then adds new records to get the result. This results in faster calculation, as the number of records to calculate has reduced. The criterion for using incremental aggregation is that the data from the previous run should remain the same. If the records from the previous run changes, the result will be incorrect, as Informatica will not consider the changed value and will replace the value with the value stored in cache. In order to handle this, make sure to check the box Reinitialize Aggregate Cache. When you check this option, Informatica reinitializes the aggregate cache value and stores the new one. It's important to note that you need to uncheck Reinitialize Aggregate Cache if your data is not changing, or else it'll always keep reinitializing the cache, which will directly hamper the performance. In the next video, we'll talk about working on parameter files.
Parameter files.
Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about defining variables at session, mapping, and workflow level. Then we'll mention the parameters at session level and workflow. Then we'll create a parameter file. It's It's always a best practice in the coding that you should never hard-code values. Same applies with Informatica. It's
Yeah.
always better to pass the values, use the parameters or variables in place of hard coding. When you define parameters or variables in the code, you need to pass the values to those parameters and variables. A parameter file serves that purpose. Any value which you hard code can be passed through a parameter file. You can define it a session level and workflow level. You may have noticed the system defined variable $PM source file dir or $PM target file dir in the session task. Similar to that, we can define user-defined variables. You can define the variable at both mapping and workflow level. If the value passed is remaining constant across the session run, it's called parameter. If the value is changing across the session run, it's called variable. Let's take an example for understanding the parameter file. You're aware that Informatica will have 3 different repositories to cater to the need of 3 regions. Let's say we have 3 repositories: repo dev,
Yeah.
repo test, and repo prod, serving to development, testing, and production region respectively. Corresponding to 3 regions, we have 3 Oracle databases: Oracle dev, Oracle test, and Oracle prod respectively. When you start the coding in development region under repo dev, you will hard code the database connection value to Oracle dev. Your code's working successfully, and when you want to deploy the code to the test region, you'll need to replace the database connection value to Oracle test manually. Changing the code after testing is not allowed. Same case applies when you wish to deploy the code from test to production. The solution comes as parameter file. They serve the purpose of passing the value based on the region in which you're running the code, or defining the parameter value for passing the value for source database connection, or $DB connection 1, target file name, $TGT file name, email recipient, $email user, and a mapping level variable for location, $location. We're using an example of session level, workflow level, and mapping level variables, so you understand clearly how it works. Defining session level variables. The variables which are defined under session task are called session level variables. There are various values which can be passed via variables like source, target database connection value, source target file name, source target file path, session log file name path, etc. Session task does most of the work. In Workflow Manager, Ends has been assigned special privilege. To pass the value through a variable, simply replace the hard-coded value with a variable of your choice. For instance, we're using the database connection variable, $DB connection 1. Similarly, assign the value to the target file name, $TGT file name. Since we define target file name under session task, it'll be referred to as session level variable. Defining workflow level variables. The variables which are defined under various tasks are called workflow level variables. Note you can define the session level variables under workflow also in parameter. In our case, we're passing email user value as a variable. To assign the value, simply replace the hard-coded value by variable in an email task, $email user. Variables. As mentioned earlier, you can define a variable for the hard-coded values in mapping inside transformations as well. You need to define parameters or variables under mapping before you can use in transformations, or else the mapping will become invalid. To add the value, open the mapping for which you wish to add variables in the mapping designer. Click mappings, parameters, and variables. In the next screen, click add a variable to this table. Define the variable. Select the type as parameter and variable based on your requirement. Click OK. As you may notice, mapping level variables are always defined as $2. Open the transformation for which you wish to assign a variable or parameter. We'll use filter transformation to pass the value. As you can see, we've assigned $location to filter condition. We're done defining the variable. Next, we'll see how to pass the values to these using a parameter file. Creating a parameter file. A parameter file is nothing but a simple text file. It contains the value of the variable to be passed to variables. A sample parameter file for the variables defined in the above steps is shown in the slide. As you can see, the parameter file contains the values of the variables to be replaced in the 3 regions, which are repo dev, repo test, and repo prod. Informatica matches the repository name against the repository defined in the parameter file, then replaces the values of the variables internally before it runs the workflow. WFM is the name of the workflow for which you define the parameter. So suppose you're running in production region, Informatica will match the repository name, repo prod, against the same name in parameter file, then replace the variables with the value internally, and execute the workflow with the replaced values. Once the parameter file is created, you need to define the parameter value so that Informatica can read it. Mentioning parameter file at workflow level. To define the parameter file at workflow, open Workflow Manager. Click Workflow, Edit, Properties. Specify the path and name of the parameter file for the attribute. Mention parameter file at session level. To define the parameter file at session, open the session in Workflow Manager. Double-click Session Task and click Properties. Specify the path and name of the parameter file for the attribute. Today we've learned how to
that's where you set the file of the name of the file.
Of any variables changing, you do not need to modify the code. Simply change the value in the parameter. And the change value will take effect the next time you run the code. Note that parameter files can also be used to replace the value for individual session run. They can also be defined at folder level, as against any repository level as seen earlier. It's not mandatory to define the workflow for all 3 regions. A sample parameter file for individual session run, s_m_pass_through, defined at folder level, learn well, is shown. In this section, we talked about various advanced features of Workflow Manager. In Workflow Manager, we created a schedule, reusable tasks, and worklets. We also configured direct and indirect file types. We learned the importance and operation of incremental aggregation, then defined the variables at session level, mapping level, and workflow level. In the next section, we'll discuss about performance optimization, pushdown optimization, and partitioning. Hey guys, previously we discussed various advanced features and utilities of Workflow Manager. Now we'll talk about various advanced aspects of Workflow Manager.
Okay.
Now we'll talk about performance optimization, configuring partitioning and various types of partitions, and pushdown optimization. We're at the last video. At this stage, you must be pretty clear with all the components and features of Informatica tool. As with any other technology related to data, we need to also. It's necessary to follow the best practices to achieve the best performance out of your code. Similar to SQL tuning, which is done to enhance performance of SQL query, we do performance tuning on Informatica. If you follow the best practices of Informatica, your code will be automatically tuned. There are many best practices, many of which we already discussed in previous videos. We'll be talking about those best practices under this video. Also understand how to use those practices to achieve the best performance. Performance optimization. In this video, we'll discuss how to understand the performance tuning of Informatica, understand bottleneck. The regular process is to first find out the bottlenecks, then eliminate those to enhance the performance. When we talk about performance tuning, you need to find out the issues in your code, called bottleneck. We'll discuss various components which need to be tuned to enhance the process, eliminating bottlenecks, and identifying the bottlenecks at various components. Bottlenecks. As mentioned, we can have bottlenecks at various stages of Informatica Power Center code. Don't be in a rush to find all the bottlenecks together and eliminate them. Try to find the first one, resolve it, and jump to another. Finding target bottleneck. Always consider checking the bottlenecks at target side first. There can be various reasons of bottlenecks at target. First, we need to learn to find the target, using thread statistics. These are part of the session.
What the hell is that?
The session log also generates the thread statistics, which can provide you information about the bottlenecks present in the source, target, or transformations. Thread statistics gives information about the total runtime, idle time, and busy percentage of source, target, and transformations. Thread statistics consist of reader thread, writer thread, and transformation thread. Reader gives information related to the total runtime, idle time, and busy percentage of the sources in the mapping. Writer gives information about the total runtime, idle time, and busy percentage of targets in the mapping. Similarly, transformation gives information related to transformations in the mapping, as indicated below in the sample thread statistics. As seen in the statistics, writer is busy for 99% compared to reader and transformation. We could say in this case, the target is bottleneck. Similar to this, you can identify if other cases source or transformation have bottlenecks. Here's another way to identify a bottleneck. Configuring sample target load. It's a simple understanding that loading the data into target table will take more time as compared to loading the data in target file. Consider you're loading the data into target table in your mapping. Configure a sample run and try to load the same data into a test target file. Check the difference in the runtime of both processes. If there's a significant difference, you can easily say that database target table have a bottleneck. Eliminate the target bottleneck. There are various ways which you can optimize the target loading. Minimize target table deadlocks. There could be a scenario when Informatica is trying to load the data into a table, which is already being used by another system. When Informatica encounters the deadlock, it hampers the processing by slowing the loading process. To avoid this, make sure the target table is not used by another process at the same time. Drop indexes and constraints. Loading the data into a table takes more time because there are multiple indexes and constraints created on the table. Each time a new record is loaded to the table, it's first checked for indexes and constraints before it gets loaded. This hampers the performance. To avoid this, you can use a pre-SQL and post-SQL command in the session task. Using pre-SQL commands can remove the indexes, and using post-SQL can apply the indexes. When you define pre-SQL and post-SQL, Informatica applies those commands.
That's actually a really good plan.
Indexes and constraints as described above is not but definitely improves the performance. You can opt for this option.
It's way faster to disable the indexes on tables.
The service keeps on creating checkpoints at predefined interval. The checkpoints are used for recovery purpose. Reducing the checkpoint interval will help enhance the performance by storing less checkpoints and storing less data related to the checkpoint. If you reduce the checkpoint interval, even though the performance will increase, it will also hamper the recovery time if the system fails with some error. Using external loader. IPC supports usage of multiple external loaders like IBM DB2, Oracle, Teradata, and Sybase IQ. They can help in faster loading into the target table. To add the external loader, open Workflow Manager, click Connection, External Loader, as seen here. In the next screen, select the loader based on your requirement. This will help enhance the performance by loading the data at a faster pace in the target. Increasing network packet size. Every table has a capacity, referred to as network packet size, with which it can accept the data. If you increase the packet size, the table can accept greater volume of data. These properties can be enhanced by a database admin. You may want to consult with your database admin team. Using bulk load. By configuring the session properties to use the bulk load, your performance can significantly enhance. When you use bulk loading, the database logs are not created. In turn, enhances the performance. If you disable the database log, the recovery cannot be done, as there is no log events on the database. As you may notice, performance can be achieved by compromising on some other factors. You need to decide and make a fine balance between all the factors. These were the various ways in which you could find and eliminate the target bottleneck. Let's talk about source bottleneck.
Drop indexes.
This can also be impacted at the source side. Various factors.
You need to enable indexes again anyway, so that's going to take some time to.
Statistics to find the source bottleneck. You can refer that section to use the thread statistics. Test mapping. Using a pass-through mapping can help you identify if the bottleneck is at the source side. Configure a test mapping to have only source qualifier, and target. Consider you have a mapping with one source, one target, and 10 transformations. The time taken to process the data through the mapping is 60 seconds. This means combining the source, target, and transformations is taking 60 seconds. Create another mapping by eliminating all the transformations and run the process and check the time. Suppose the time taken to complete the process is 50 seconds. Compared to the combined time of target and transformation, which is 10 seconds, 50 is relatively high. That's This indicates we have a source bottleneck. Using filter transformation, you can use a filter transformation to check if the source is having a bottleneck. Put one in front of the source qualifier and set the condition to false. Don't allow the record to pass through the filter ahead in the mapping. Using this method, you can compare the runtime of the process with and without the filter condition. This way, you can identify if the source has a bottleneck. Checking database query. This is another simple method to find the source bottleneck if you're extracting the data from the table. When you use source qualifier to read the data from the database table, integration service writes a query to extract the data. Copy the query and run the same query at the database level in SQL Developer or a similar tool. Compare the time taken by the query to execute at both the places. This can give you an idea if the source has a bottleneck. Eliminating source bottleneck. There are various ways which you can optimize the source. They're discussed as followed. Increase network packet size. As discussed under eliminating target bottleneck, increasing network packet size of the table will allow greater volume of the data to pass the network at the particular instance. These can be enhanced by a database admin, so I would consult your database admin to increase the network packet size. Optimizing database query. When you read the data from a database table, integration service generates a query to extract the data from the table. You can fine-tune the query to extract only the required data. If you extract all the data, then add filter or other transformations, it'll hamper the performance. You can tune the query to extract only the required data. This will save time and help in performance enhancement. This is called SQL override. These were ways in which you could find and eliminate the source bottleneck. Let's talk about mapping and transformation bottleneck. Finding mapping bottleneck. If you don't have a source or target bottleneck, you may have mapping or transformation bottleneck. Thread statistics. As discussed under finding target bottleneck, use thread statistics to find the transformation bottleneck. Filter transformation. You can use that to check if the transformation is a mapping. If the transformation mapping is having a bottleneck, put a filter transformation before the target and set the condition to false, meaning do not allow any record to pass to the target. Using this method, you can compare the runtime of the process with and without the filter condition. You can identify if the transformations have a bottleneck. Single pass-through mapping. Consider you have a mapping with a source, source qualifier, few transformations, and a target. Execute the process and check the runtime. In the next run, remove all the transformations and just have the source, source qualifier, and target. Execute the process and check the runtime. If runtime is having a considerable difference, this indicates the transformation in your mapping is taking more time compared to the source and target. Eliminate mapping.
Yeah, well, that's pretty much guessing the obvious, I guess.
Pass mapping. Let's say you have multiple targets to load from the same source. In such a scenario, avoid creating multiple mappings. You can save significant time by loading the multiple targets in the same mapping. Use a single source and pass the data to different pipelines, then to multiple.
I was thinking about doing precisely that, creating multiple mappings.
Avoid data type conversions. Avoid changing the data types across the transformation in the mapping. When you change the data type, integration service takes time for processing. It's always recommended you should not change the data type wherever you're not required. Uncheck unnecessary ports.
Avoid data type conversions. But that's the thing. I will use it for that.
Integration service processes numeric data faster compared to other data. Try to process as much numeric data as you can. Operators instead of a function. Integration service processes operators faster compared to functions. Consider using a pipe in place of concat functions. To concatenate the data, use decode in place of multiple IIF. If your logic contains multiple IIF functions, replace them using decode. Decode is faster to multiple.
Using operators instead of function. Well, that's obvious, I think. I guess.
Writes the info about the run in the session log.
So basically, you're telling me
Use variable ports. If you're performing
use as less as possible of Informatica functions.
value multiple times in the transformation. Suppose you convert first name and last name in uppercase, then concatenate them. And also, you need to cut part of the data. In place of using upper function every time, use the variable port to convert data in uppercase, and use the variable port to perform other operations. That way, you save time in performing the same operation multiple times. Optimize filter transformation. You can use that as early as possible in the mapping to avoid processing unnecessary data. If you filter unwanted records early in the mapping, you can enhance the performance. Similarly, use router transformation in place of multiple filter transformations. That'll help save you time. Optimize aggregator transformation. Always pass sorted data to the aggregator in order to enhance the performance. When you pass the sorted data, the integration service needs to save less data in the cache.
Oh, sorted data into aggregator.
Transformation by doing a group by numeric columns. For example, consider grouping the data on department ID in place of location. It's only possible to do per your business requirement. Use incremental aggregation whenever possible in the session properties to enhance the performance. If you use incremental aggregation, you improve your performance. Since aggregator now needs to calculate lesser records. Optimize joiner transformation. It's recommended to assign the table with lesser number of records as master. While using joiner, the table with lesser number of duplicates should be used as a master table. We also recommend to perform join in source multiplier using SQL override. Performing joins on the database is sometimes faster compared to performing in Informatica. Passing the sorted data to joiner transformation enhances the performance, as this utilizes less disk space compared to unsorted data. Optimize lookup transformation. Lookups are one of the complex transformations in IPC. Optimizing lookup will significantly help improve the performance. When you use lookup in the mapping, use concurrent cache. When you use concurrent cache, integration service caches the lookup table data before it starts processing the data from the source. Otherwise, lookup performs cache on row-wise basis, which uses more time. So we recommend you enable caching when you use lookup. If your mapping contains multiple lookups, which look up on same lookup table, it's suggested you share the cache in order to avoid performing caching multiple times. You can reduce the processing time if you properly use lookup SQL override in lookup transformation. If you use lookup to look up on database table, you can use lookup SQL override to reduce the amount of data you look up. This helps save the cache space. If you're using more than one lookup condition in lookup, it's recommended you place the conditions in the optimized order. For instance, place equal condition first, then less than, then greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and finally, not equal to. This will enhance the performance. These were the various ways which combine and eliminate the mapping and transformation bottleneck. Now, here's session bottleneck. Eliminating session bottleneck. If you don't have source, target, or mapping bottlenecks, you could check session properties to check for bottlenecks. Optimize commit interval. Commit interval is the number of records after which integration service commits the data into target. Selecting appropriate commit interval will help enhance the performance. If you select commit interval as a low value, it'll make integration service commit data more number of times, which will hamper the performance. Buffer memory. When you run the workflow, integration service needs to allocate blocks of memory to hold the data at various stages of processing, including cache if required. Make sure you have sufficient buffer memory available, or else integration service fails the process because of the lack of memory. Performance data. Session properties allow you to store the performance-related details to repository. If you select to save the performance details, integration service writes the log to the repository. This will consume the processing time. Make sure you're not checking the option if you do not require to save the performance details. Eliminating system bottleneck. Last step in enhancing the performance you could try is find the bottlenecks in the system. Eliminating system bottleneck may not be in your control. You can for improving the system capabilities to enhance the performance. You can use multiple CPUs to make the process run faster, or make the session run in parallel. Check with the admin team if the network is working properly at the optimized speed to confirm if the processing is optimized. You can also contact them to add extra memory if the buffer memory or cache memory is not sufficient. Adding extra space may save the processing time.
Yeah, but that's
using the above mentioned performance rules can make your
yeah, but that might imply that you're basically asking them to give you more RAM when there is not. Partitioning. Oh my god. Please don't be similar to database partitioning.
In this video, we'll talk about how to understand partitioning, as well as the properties and types of partitioning. We'll talk about the bottleneck and various components. Before we learn partitioning, make note that partitioning is a highly available feature, which you need to purchase separately from Informatica. If you enable the feature, you can make use of partitioning. By default, a mapping containing source, target, and transformations have a single partition. A single means a single record can flow from source to target at a time. By adding multiple partitions, you logically divide the mapping into multiple sections. Each one can pass a record at a time. If you make 3 partitions in the mapping, 3 records can pass through a mapping, making your runtime reduced by 1/3. When you add a partition at any stage of mapping, integration service adds partitions at other stages of the mapping. Make sure you have sufficient memory space and system capacity to handle the processing of multiple records at a time. Consider you have 1,000 records to process. Suppose you created 4 partitions. Integration service will process 4 records at a time. The total time required to process 1,000 records will be reduced to a fourth. To enable partitions, you need to set the partitioning properties in the session task. Partitioning properties. To enable partitioning, you need to define the following attributes. Partition points, number of partitions. You can define the partition points in a pipeline. By default, integration service sets a partition at various transformations. You can define the partition at any stage in the mapping. Based on your system capability, you can increase or decrease the partitions. When you add a partition at any stage of the pipeline, integration service adds the same number of partitions at other stages of the mapping. The number of partitions in a mapping should be equal to the number of database connections at the source and target side. When you create partitions, integration service processes the data concurrently. Suppose you created 3 partitions. Integration service reads 3 records from the source, passes 3 records to transformations, and concurrently loads 3 records. Types of partitions. Informatica supports multiple types of partitions to distribute data. A partition type controls how you wish to divide the data amongst the partitions you created in the mapping. If you have a high availability feature available, you can define the type of partition at different stages of the mapping. You can define the type of partitioning in session properties. The different types are mentioned below. Pass through. Integration service does not distribute data amongst partitions. The data in the particular partition stays in the partition after passing through the partition point. Round robin. Integration service distributes the data evenly amongst the partitions. This makes an equal amount of data pass through each partition. Key range. This distributes the data on the basis of ports, or set, or port ports defined, you also define the range of value for each port. When the source and target are partitioned by key range, select this type of partitioning. Database partition. This type is possible with Oracle or DB2 databases. When you select database partitioning, integration service reads the partitioning information from the nodes in the database. Hash auto keys. This divides the data based on partition key using the hash function. All
Okay.
ordered and sorted ports in transformations are used as partition key. This type of partition can be used in rank, sorter, and aggregator transformation. Hash user keys. Similar to hash auto keys, this portioning uses the hash functions to partition the data. You need to manually define the number of ports for the partition key. In the next video, we'll talk about pushdown optimization.
So basically it's multi-threading, similar to multi-threading.
Welcome back. In this video, we'll talk about understanding pushdown optimization, as well as the properties and application. Pushdown optimization is a concept using which you can push the transformation logic at the source or target database side when you have the source as database table. SQL override.
So you basically skip the entire do it in Informatica
The
thing.
data at database level is faster compared to processing it.
Well, obviously,
Not removing all
because
the transformations.
Informatica is not doing it.
Logic, which can be pushed at source or target level, is referred to as pushdown optimization. Consider you have a mapping with a sequence. In filter transformation, we're filtering the data on a particular location. In sorter transformation, the data is sorted on a particular department ID. In aggregator, we're
So I can just create a view on the database side and
LKP function. And finally,
the view may contain the actual source already transformed.
filter, sorter, and aggregator
And that's how I used to do it before knowing about Informatica anyway.
source qualifier transformation. We cannot remove expression as we cannot write (LKP function in SQL override. So simple. After using SQL override indicated below, source
Source of qualifier expression, lookup, rank, target.
Pushdown optimization will help save the
Source of qualifier, filter, sorter, aggregator, expression, lookup. No, yeah, we are removing a lot, yeah.
Go to the Properties tab and select the options as Allow Temporary View for Pushdown, Allow Temporary Sequence for Pushdown, and Allow Pushdown for Pushdown in the Session Property.
Oh, it's, those are properties with attributes, okay.
We talked about the various techniques in which you can enhance the performance. We talked about source, target, and transformation bottlenecks. Even after optimizing your source, target, and mapping, your performance is not up to date. Take a look at your session and system bottlenecks. We also saw the various ways of optimizing the components of Power Center tool. Then we talked about the partitioning and pushdown optimization, which you can use those to enhance the performance. With this in mind, we completed all the concepts of Informatica Power Center tool. In these videos, we learned concepts which are useful for beginner and intermediate level experience in Informatica. We also touched upon a lot of advanced level concepts in these videos. Also, with some more practice and theory exposure, you'll be able to clear first level on Informatica Power Center certification. You'll be able to clear first level on the Informatica Power Center certification. Thanks for joining me in this course.
Wait, what? Okay, I guess that's it. It went pretty well, I think. Most of these things, I guess I'm going to be rewatching them as I need them, but at least now my brain has the location where everything can be found. Wait, what's this? Yeah, let's try to do the quiz. Let's try just for the sake of it. It used to send success or failure email notifications. Yes. Which among the following is the use event wait task? No. Use it to execute unit. No. There we go. It's this one. Check for answer. Let's do it the right way, I guess. Oh, what? What the hell? Resume quiz. Okay, question number 2. Is that okay? That's okay. So state whether true or false if you wish to reuse logic implemented using multiple transformations in an existing mapping. You can simply copy the existing transformations from Mapping Designer and paste it in Maplet Designer. I think this is true. Oh wait, no, it's false. I believe you need to just convert them. Yes. Incorrect. It was true. Oh, never mind. Question number 3 is defined in the properties of transformations. Okay, dependency level, tracing level, mapping. Maybe dependency level. No, I don't think so. Tracing level. Question number 4. Which of the following are Informatica Power Center event types? Okay, event wait, task, event rise task. Okay. Incorrect. Wow. Yeah, no idea then. Types. Okay, I guess. What is the use of control task? Use to control execution of the workflow. And there we go. No, it's not that bad, I guess. Continue. Well, yeah, it could be better. better. Save and continue. Are you learning about information? Yes. Are the explanations of concepts clear? Yes. The instructor is delivering engaging? Yes. Are there enough opportunities to apply what you're learning? Not sure. Is the course delivering your expectations? Not really. Is the instructor knowledgeable about the topic? Yes, I guess. I'm not sure actually. Let's skip. Save and exit. Find more courses. Well, I think that's going to be enough for Informatica on this week. I need to move on to the next technology I'm going to need for my work, for my job, and that's going to be, let me see, recently enrolled. I wonder if it's going to be SSRS or Power BI. Well, that's still to be decided, I guess. But I think it's going to be actually Microsoft Power BI. Yeah, I believe it's going to be either SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, or Microsoft Power BI. One of those two is going to be. I'm not sure which one. But anyway, that's going to be all for today. Thank you for coming into this stream, and see you later.